I have no interest in chasing Congress people around Capitol Hill. I have a lot more interest in hanging out in coffee shops with entrepreneurs. VCs and reporters have a lot more in common than they care to think.
Okay.
I wanted a new challenge. I wanted to grow. I'm not the kind of person to just like have work-life balance and chase side quests and like go train for a marathon. Like I needed to feel really driven intellectually and like I was doing something that mattered and that I was growing in it. At the same time, then I felt like the market was pulling us in, that hopefully Upstarts resonates with founders, with other people who care about startups, that they weren't getting that coverage.
Alex, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm super excited to learn more about you and what you're up to with your new company. But to kick things off, give us the scoop. You've been in journalism/media for, it seems like your entire career. And I think most people in the venture world would know you from Forbes. But I'm sure a lot happened before that and you're up to a lot now. So where did this all start?
I really was thinking, what could I do that will pay me to do one of my favorite things, and that is really talking and storytelling. And so as soon as I realized in college that there is no Indiana Jones job out there in the world, which I learned the hard way, I think storytelling was really where I gravitated. And then startups specifically became an area that I just saw as really important and growing, a great place to build a career. And so I started covering startups when I was in college in, I think, 2010. And now I feel old, when I do the math and see that was closer to 20 years than 10 years ago.
Yeah. And then I guess, what was your first big gig? Like, in your opinion?
Yeah. So I had a choice when I was in college. I got a sort of sponsorship offer to basically have an internship covered because no one pays media interns. Case in point, my first internship was at the local NPR radio. They paid $10 a day, not including my Metro card. So I was really getting like $5 a day, and I had to tutor to actually make any real money. But then I was lucky enough to have a choice between CNN in DC covering politics or Fortune covering tech. And I thought politics and tech are both areas that are probably going to be really important in the country. But personally, I have no interest in chasing Congress people around Capitol Hill. I have a lot more interest in hanging out in coffee shops with entrepreneurs. And so I leaned into tech, and I joined Fortune after I graduated. And I covered a lot of the up-and-coming New York startups like General Assembly, Blue Apron, ZocDoc, Foursquare, and I had the dubious distinction of writing the first big story about WeWork. So,
oh, wow.
Yes.
I was going to say, does the world seem so much different to you now, writing about tech companies today?
It's matured a lot. One thing for me is I'm always looking for greenfield opportunity, and we can talk about why Upstarts is positioned the way it is in that regard. But I think, with my career, a lot of tech reporters, at least 15 years ago, were based in the Bay Area. There's still a ton here as well, but it felt like New York was a little more open for a young, ambitious person to talk to the companies there. Now we do have more reporters there. The New York companies are better known. And also, like, we're in a much more intertwined ecosystem, right? Like, cool founders in New York or Texas. I think it wasn't really the case 15 years ago, where, a VC in the West Coast would almost find it uncool to know what was happening in New York.
Yeah. Who were like the funds in New York at that time? Was it Thrive and Union Square Venture?
Thrive was really just like an idea. Like Thrive was incubating Oscar and doing some of its first things, but Josh had not really emerged on the scene yet. It was really Union Square Ventures. Fred Wilson was like the OG. And then you had this other guy, Alan Patrikoff, who I think is around 90 now and still in the ecosystem. He's become like the elder statesman of the ecosystem. He had started a firm called Graycroft that was in New York. Then you had Eric Hippo and Kenny Lear, who were at Lear Hippo. You had a couple other firms, but it was really like 5 firms in New York.
That's crazy.
Chris Dixon was there, before he had moved to the West Coast and become Mr. Andreessen Crypto. He was like a young gun on the East Coast back then too. Yeah.
It's crazy how much changes. It feels like it's been 5 minutes and it's been a long time.
Yeah.
So you were there for a couple of years, and then you ended up at Forbes, which I think most people might know you from today. What happened there?
First, I learned how hard the media business was because I left Fortune when Time Inc., the whole company, and this is when they owned Sports Illustrated and all these other brands, they went into sort of a hiring freeze. And I maxed out my hours as like an entry-level reporter. So they basically were like, you can take a 3-month unpaid leave and go back to the tutoring, or you can just go get another job. And they were like, we think you should get another job. So I was like, okay. So I looked around, Forbes was hiring. I actually joined as the homepage editor back when people went to these homepages, and I learned all the weird decisions that go into that. There was a presidential election while I was the homepage editor, and it was like, let's not put anything crazy on the website and all that. But pretty quickly, I was like, how can I get back to startups and covering tech? And so I just kind of wormed my way into the tech coverage, covering ad tech especially. Again, just an underserved area in New York, and there were a lot of unicorns in ad tech at that moment. But then my big break was probably taking over the Midas List in 2014, where yes, I went from not knowing a ton about venture capital to knowing way more than anyone should have to about venture capital.
Yes. Is your favorite part of all of this really just meeting with founders and hearing about like what they're building and trying to track like where we think the world is moving?
Kind
Do you
of.
like the venture side of this as much, or are we just a bunch of arrogant?
I don't think you're arrogant. I think that VCs and reporters have a lot more in common than they care to think.
Okay.
I think part of it is that we all probably get the most energy out of meeting with really inspiring founders and just hearing about kind of the vision, the where technology could go, and then everything else kind of farther away from there gets noisier and less fun. I think one big difference, though, is just that journalists are trained to think what could go wrong, or like, what is the impact here? What are the unseen implications of this? Like, can I see around the corner there? Whereas a VC might be thinking that to like diligence the deal, but then pretty quickly they're like, what are all the things that could go right here?
Yeah.
So just a little bit of like two sides of the coin. But I'd say meeting with founders has always been the most fun for me, and traveling around the world to sort of see them in their element. Like I did a story on Canva where I went to Australia. I went to visit the CEO of UiPath in Bucharest, Romania before they went public, which was super fun because basically when you see these people in New York or in San Francisco, they're a certain way. And then especially these entrepreneurs who have moved here, if you go back to their home country, they're like a big deal. And suddenly the CEO of UiPath is walking around the office in shorts and flip-flops, because who's going to tell him no? Very, very cool. And so with Upstarts, that's been a big joy for me, is to really lean back into founders as the heartbeat of the ecosystem. I will still write about VCs. I will talk to VCs all the time. I just think that coverage of VC for the sake of it is maybe not as helpful for the ecosystem.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then just going back a little bit, so the Midas List, for anyone that doesn't know what that is, how does that, what is it?
The Midas List is a ranking of the world's top venture capitalists that Forbes has put out since 2000.
Okay.
So it's the oldest list of this kind, and it's been very resilient. I ran it for 10 years, and I think we really expand the brand while I was there. It started out kind of as just who are the biggest deal makers, especially in Silicon Valley. Then it really focused on who are the best venture investors. And it's a complicated model that basically calculates deal scores for eligible portfolio companies on a partner level, and then kind of tries to put them all alongside each other. So early stage through growth stage. Very hard to do.
Do VCs have to opt in to share that performance with you so that you know that it's legitimate? And like, because I don't know where you'd really find it. I guess there's IPOs and maybe you can pull back some of the data there, but do they have to opt in and hand things over to show proof of performance, or is it not that granular?
It's sort of a yes and situation where a number of years ago, Forbes partnered with a fund of funds called TrueBridge.
Oh, yes.
And TrueBridge brought their portfolio of funds and also just their relationships to get a bunch of firms to start submitting their data confidentially. Once Forbes for a few years was getting like 100 firms' data, you can triangulate a lot of the ecosystem. So then you start to find people who maybe didn't initially want publicity. Like, the first year that I came across Ribbit Capital and Mickey Malka, who's an amazing investor, I was like, who the heck is this guy? He has very little internet presence, but his portfolio was incredible, Nubank and all these other companies. So we had to kind of then go to Mickey and be like, hey, we know your track record. It's really great. You should be on the list. I think a big thing that Midas does that other lists maybe have tripped up on is it's not optional to make the list.
Okay.
They don't play favorites. They don't take people off as a favor. And that keeps it kind of as fair as possible. So whenever we would have people accuse it of bias, I'd be like, you could accuse it of bias in 100 different ways, but there are people on this list who like yell at me about making it, and I still would have to put them on.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay.
So.
And then quickly touch on, because everyone knows it, Forbes 30 under 30. Was this you, or was this also something that you inherited?
I created one part of 30 under 30, so any comments can attack me on that one. But specifically the venture capital side, because I was working on that. And there was just a lot of interest in emerging managers, people coming up. I'm around the same age as people who run some of these really cool funds now, like Nichole Basu-Trivedi at Footwork, or Chad Byers at Sousa, who I know you know. So kind of coming up alongside these people, it was pretty easy to put together a list of amazing young VCs at first. And I bet you could not guess who our first call out top under 30 venture capitalist was back in the day.
Was it Chad?
It was actually Sam Altman.
Oh, really? Oh,
Sam
interesting.
Altman, when he was running YC, was still very much an active investor.
Oh, wow.
So he was on the list. And so I joke with 30 under 30, there are a lot of really successful people. You might know some yourself. It might resonate with you.
Yeah.
Who, as they're successful, they don't lead with that, or it's not how they're defined.
Yeah.
30 under 30 kind of becomes a meme when it's the highlight of someone's career, which you
Right.
never want. You don't want to peak in high school.
No,
you don't want to peak with under 30.
When I see it in a founder's header, I'm like, oh gosh, like it can be subtle and but actually the first time you and I ever maybe communicated is you sent me a DM and I was about to turn 32 and you're like, you'd be a great candidate for Forbes 30 under 30. And I was like, oh my God, I'm too
I was so
late.
devastated. You would have been
old.
great. But that was kind of how it worked is we would, alumni like a Chad or just people who were plugged in the ecosystem might say, hey, you should find this person. And I think that was what I intended with that list was I'm going to look for, emerging managers or young VCs who aren't super well known. And maybe it can be a boost for them. It can be a good network opportunity. But under 30 across the board was never supposed to like make or break someone's career, And I'm so glad that I don't have to work on it anymore. We people ask me about it all the time, but it is very much a happy past chapter in my life now. So
No, I'm thrilled for you, which is a great segue into you left. Has it even been a year?
Yeah, it's almost a year.
Okay.
I mean, I've been thinking about this for over a year, but I left Forbes at the beginning of the year, and we're now in October. So yeah.
Give us the whole scoop. What is Upstarts? Like, what are you up to? What are you building?
So upstartsmedia.com. Anyone can go to that right now. They should just pause
Subscribe.
paying attention and just go subscribe. It's free to subscribe.
Perfect.
Got to be hustling all the time. Upstarts is a new media publication focused on startups. So I'm a startup and I'm telling stories about other startups. And the idea was basically that founders are at their best when they are punching above their weight, challenging the status quo, embracing sort of an upstart mentality, and that we need more of that storytelling in the market right now. I was really feeling restless that I had kind of told all the Forbes style stories I wanted to. I'd written over 15 cover stories on, like Ryan Peterson at Flexport, the Stripe guys, the Collisons, a lot of these folks, Melanie at Canva. And I just felt like I could just keep doing that forever, kind of the same story over and over, or I could try new kinds of storytelling, experiment, have fun with things, and also talk about earlier stage companies who I felt like were not really getting as much attention. It's, as you know, and you've tweeted a lot about this, the crazy numbers, with startups fundraising or claiming ARR growth, this is a small subset of all the companies out there. And so Upstarts hopefully can do a small bit to just shine a light and talk about trends in companies that we think deserve more attention.
Yeah. I realize that people say AI has got larger opportunities for $100 billion plus outcomes, which I don't know, TBD. Do you feel like you have a pulse on this? And does it compare to 21 from your seat where you're talking to these people and you're the first to know about huge, fundraising announcements or revenue metrics or any of that stuff?
The parts that I think remind me of the ZIRP era for sure are when the valuations get completely detached from the numbers. That I just did a dinner in New York for 20 founders where we called it the Tale of Two Cities, where there were a few AI founders and then some non-AI founders. And we were talking about basically, why do some companies just get completely detached from reality and others have to prove, retention metrics and like all the traditional numbers that you would expect of a software business. And so I think where I see the froth is when, let's say, AI ERP, one big firm makes an investment there, and then other firms feel FOMO and they're like, who's another company here we can invest in? And suddenly you have three companies, and this really happened in AI ERP, where you have three companies suddenly raise at multi-$100 million valuations on like under $1 million or $2 million in revenue.
Yeah.
And I think that is a little crazy because I meet amazing founders and businesses that are still raising at the traditional multiples we would think, that are still like software businesses. It's gotten to the point that I even have joked to founders. I'm like, so are you like a AI company or are you like a normal startup?
Yeah,
and they're like,
for decades and be amazing.
Yeah.
Do you feel like when you have an employer, you can't always do what you want and you're a reflection of the brand. And so it might have been harder for you to just do some of the things maybe you wanted to do, or I don't know. Do you feel like some of the push to go out on your own was because you wanted to do more of what you wanted to do, or did you feel this pull in the market changing where you're like, tech is going to fundamentally be different, like with AI? Or was it a mix of both?
I think it should be both. I'd be
Yeah.
curious if this was, how you felt with Wischoff Ventures, but I think, for me, it's like I personally, I wanted a new challenge. I wanted to grow. I'm not the kind of person to just like have work-life balance and chase side quests and like go train for a marathon. Like I needed to feel really driven intellectually and like I was doing something that mattered and that I was growing in it. At the same time, then I felt like the market was pulling us in, that hopefully Upstarts resonates with founders, with other people who care about startups, that they weren't getting that coverage.
Yeah.
I think it would have been harder if I had one and not the other. Of course, we've seen founders be successful, not loving their product or
Yeah.
not really wanting to take the plunge. But for me, I needed both. And maybe that's why it took so long. One reaction 12 years at Forbes was like, oh, you finally did it. And like that finally word could be really loaded.
Yeah. What I don't know a lot about, and I'm assuming most people don't, is how do you make money going out on your own? Like, what does your business actually look like?
It's a great question. One that I have to ask myself all the time. How am I making? No, I am making money. Basically, I think, media companies these days are best when they have multiple revenue streams. You don't want to fall into a race for clickbait, just high volume where you get programmatic ads. You also, I think, have a hard time just relying on subscriber revenue. So how we've structured Upstarts is to have 3 revenue streams where basically I do have 2 tiers in my newsletter. And the free edition every week is sponsored by a presenting sponsor for like 1 or 3 months. We've worked with Brex, Notion, Vanta, and we actually just signed on for October a newer startup called Structify. Good for them.
Oh.
They reached out and they were like, we would love to lean into this. And I was like, that's the hustle we want.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to work with, any sort of mission aligned startup to be sort of that sponsor. We engage with them on social media. We have an ad, saying presented by this in the newsletter, but it's pretty light touch and it's very organic. It's not like they're, injecting anything into the posts. At the same time, I do have a premium level of the subscription. So I published recently an interview with the co-founder of Canva about their big partnership with OpenAI. Like they were all over OpenAI Dev Day, Canva's integrated into ChatGPT. And so the only interview Canva gave was with me for that. And so the hope is that you would pay less than a sandwich a month to get that kind of thing in Upstarts as well and support me where that's ad free. It's just,
I subscribe. I love it.
well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is events. And, I think one thing that maybe the audience might not know is that events are a huge source of revenue for traditional media companies. So big and small events are where a lot of media companies end up playing. And it's why you would see, the New York Times or Fortune or Forbes have these big conferences. I'm trying to do a much
Oh, so
smaller.
you host them. You don't just show up and
You host.
Okay.
So, Fortune has Brainstorm Tech. Forbes has the Under 30 Summit, and they do like a thing for billionaires. Even my friend Eric Newcomer, who has like a new media brand called Newcomer, they do this Cerebral Valley conference here in San Francisco. These events are a great way to kind of drive a lot of interest in your publication, but then either through tickets or sponsorship, it's a lot of revenue.
Interesting.
So like I'm in San Francisco right now to host a lunch for 40 founders where I got a couple brands, Mercury and Vanta, to partner with me on that. So I make a little revenue and then it drives excitement because I had 1,200 founders apply for this lunch. And I emailed all of them to be like, hey, if you didn't make it, subscribe. We'll give you a first word on the next one. You try to build momentum as a community. So it's sort of a win-win there. But for me, it's like all 3 revenue streams matter. The hope is that you build a fairly big business there. But I actually declined to raise outside capital because I'm not sure if that's ever 10x or 100x. Like I just want to be profitable, sustainable, and helpful to the ecosystem.
I think the TBPN guys also were quoted to say they didn't want to raise outside capital.
Yeah.
You could just blind your judgment, or like, what's the...
I think once you raise capital, you can fall into sort of pressure to grow at all costs.
Yeah.
And I think, John and Jordy, like they're the show. I don't think they necessarily want 5 different TBPN shows
Right.
with 5 different sets of hosts, right? Like TBPN for pets, TBPN for...
I don't know.
Yeah.
Those guys have big minds. So
I mean-
I bet they would do it all.
Maybe, but I think overall, and I know them a little bit, they just actually brought in a friend of mine, Dylan, who worked with Jordy at Party Round to be
I saw
president.
this,
Yeah,
yeah.
Dylan's great. He should
I
come
sent
on
him
the
a
show.
note. I was like, you're crushing it.
Yeah,
It's so awesome.
So I think they're growing fast, but they want to do it in their own way, like, with their own personal style up front. Like Jordy and John really are associated with the TBPN brand.
Yeah.
I think this is an opportunity and challenge for Upstarts too, where, if you like Alex's writing, maybe you followed me at Forbes or you see me goofing around on Twitter, you would be like, okay, I like Upstarts too. But over time, how do people interact with Upstarts where maybe they don't know me? That's a big question.
Yeah.
And if you raise capital, it would be like, let's just hire a ton of people. Let's grow it as fast as we can to basically get to that point.
Yeah.
Where we can get rid of Alex because he's a bad CEO.
Yes. And
Although
this is your baby.
I'm the best CEO Upstarts has ever had, I'm also the worst CEO Upstarts has ever had. So yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right. Final two questions.
Yeah.
One, just totally random fireball. What's the best interview you've ever done, or the most interesting person you've ever interviewed?
I've had some really funny experiences. I mentioned earlier the UiPath story, and there's one funny thing about that, which is I love how every founder just has like a really unique style. And if I can bring that out in a story, it really resonates with people. So I was fact checking this UiPath cover story, and we had in there that when he's back in Romania, he would get up and read a novel to open his mind and then take a nap and then go into the office. Real product, kind of visionary founder. And so we put in there that he would like roll into the office at like 10:30 or something like that. We get this very intense fact-checking note being like, this is wrong. You can't put wrong information. And I'm like, oh, he doesn't want people to necessarily know about that. He writes back and he goes, I go into the office at 11.
That's amazing.
And I loved it because it was like, this is who he is. Like,
Yep.
he is a quirky, visionary product guy, and he's okay with people seeing his personality. So for me, like, usually the most memorable interviews are where I learned something about the founder. Like, I learned how Melanie Perkins at Canva went kite surfing with Richard Branson and now never wants to kite surf again. She like almost died and was like, that's it. But she had to do it to fundraise, or Ryan Peterson wanted to go on a ferry around the Bay Area with me because people can see him talk about this on social media. He's obsessed with how great San Francisco's ferries are and how much money they lose.
He does talk about this.
Yes, they lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
So for that interview, he was like, let's ride a ferry across the bay. And I was like, okay.
That's fantastic. He does tweet. He just tweeted about this.
He did.
Last question. How do founders and also investors get in touch with you if they want you to cover their story or they want to spend time with you?
So a blessing and curse is that I'm only publishing like 8 to 12 times a month. Okay. And so I have to kind of think strategically about what stories I'm going to accept. So usually for a funding exclusive or a launch coming out of stealth, I'm trying to talk to folks like 2 or 3 weeks in advance. Okay. They'll often either reach out through a mutual founder who I've already covered or an investor that I know. Warm intros really power this industry in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. But that said, I do check my DMs. I do check cold email. Like, I try to not be too exclusive and relying on a network, because I think this is probably true for you as an investor too. Mm-hmm. I'm always mindful of my blind spots and being over reliant on kind of the same sources over and over. Yeah. So I try to change it up. But the best way to get in front of me is to subscribe, give me feedback on a startup that I write about, and then be like, oh, and maybe you would want to write about my startup. And then suddenly I'm like, you're not just in it for the transaction of, hey, please write about me, but you want to like debate about the ecosystem with me. And that's the most fun thing for me. I want my stories to be discussed. Yeah. No one wants to write an article or tape a podcast and have nobody care, right?
Yes, no, for sure. Well, this was wonderful. Thank you so much, Alex. We're super excited for you, and everyone subscribe.
Well, Nichole, I mean, you have built a real brand, and I was honored to get to write about it in my last job, and I can't wait for Upstarts to do more with your firm in the future.
Yeah, love it. Thank you, Alex.
Cool. I mean, you have built a real brand, and I was honored to get to write about it in my last job, and I can't wait for Upstarts to do more with your firm in the future.
Yeah, love it. Thank you, Alex.
Cool.